For a long time, the Middle Ages had a bad reputation. The general public regarded it as a gloomy, dark interval. Just after the Second World War, however, the bleak Middle Ages suddenly changed colour. In January 1948, the popular Life magazine printed a nearly 600-year-old calendar in full colour for millions of readers. The colourful reproductions suddenly got a prominent place in many a living room. The images are now the icons of an era. We find them on postcards, in history books, on mouse pads, playing cards and coasters. But however famous this artwork has become through many reproductions, its medieval creators remain very obscure. The work of the Limbourg brothers wasn't meant for us. It was created for the private enjoyment of kings and princes. It stayed firmly behind the walls of castles and palaces for generations. No one else ever laid eyes on it, or even knew about its existence. The Limbourg brothers' masterpiece is called Les Très Riches Heures de Duc de Berry, and it is the most valuable book in the world. This manuscript is safely locked away in Château de Chantilly, just north of Paris. The parchment pages are extremely vulnerable and hardly ever shown to the public. Very rarely will one of the Earth's rulers be allowed a glimpse of this manuscript. Only presidents like John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon preceded you. The work created by the Limbourg brothers consists of a large number of miniatures of unparalleled quality and detail. These paintings, however, are smaller than an A4 page and are hidden away in a small number of books. By combining archive material with new discoveries in old libraries and museums, a clearer picture of the lives of these obscure master painters emerges from the mists of time. This is the story of Herman, Paul, and Johann van Limburg, also known as the Limbourg brothers. The Limbourg brothers rose rapidly at the French court, but very few people know that these medieval painters had their artistic base in what is now called the Netherlands.
Ze hebben ook iets toverachtigs, iets sprookjesachtigs gaat ervan uit. Ja, ze stralen iets uit en wat ze uitstralen, dat is naar mijn gevoel het echte oprechte, grote kunstenaarschap en vakmanschap van deze mensen.
But the smallness of it obviously is part of the excitement. It's always been one of the excitements in art. Very large things and very small things. The small things are secret.
The three Limbourg brothers painted landscapes and portraits with a precision that was unheard of in their time. They gave us the first snowy landscape in the history of painting. Smoke from a chimney, skies full of clouds, a proper night scene, paintings with perspective, people of flesh and blood. The Limbourg brothers were way ahead of their time with these innovations. Their medieval art set the trend for modern painting.
Some painters make their career primarily because they could do one thing that was new or different and great, and you focus on that primarily. But the Limbourg brothers do all of it.
And indeed, their art is the great flowering, the great effervescence, like fireworks in the sky, a huge shattering of some of the most beautiful art that was produced.
Some of the 600-year-old paintings are so realistic that we can still recognize them today. The month December on the calendar shows a hunting scene with the great donjon of Vincennes Castle in Paris clearly in the background. The Mont Saint-Michel hasn't changed much since the Limbourg brothers lived. Even back then, the Breton monastery island fell dry at low tide. Even though the farmers have left the city, the Parisian Ile de la Cité is clearly recognizable on the June page. It is these pictures of proud castles that determine our impression of the Middle Ages.
The illuminations of the Limbourg brothers certainly give us a window into the medieval world, but it's a window into a very, very rarefied part of the medieval world. It's the world of a royal prince.
You have to think of the times. These were extremely bad times. The king was mad. This is the period of the 100 Years' War. This was not an easy time to be alive. Politically extremely unsettled. And when you look at the manuscripts, however, you don't have a sense that his peasants are, let's say, overtaxed, but yet they look extremely happy to be working out in the fields, mowing the hay and reaping the wheat. Of course, it's very rough and dirty work, but you wouldn't know it for the pictures. It all looks as if everything is sweet and hunky-dory, as we say.
Het water van de rivier stroomde traag voorbij onder de bogen van de bruggen. Het was troebel, vol slip en vuil. Alleen op het grasland en de akkers buiten de wallen van Parijs ging het werk ondanks de schroeiende hitte zonder onderbreking door. De boeren wilden het graan binnenhalen voor vernietigende onweersbuien zouden losbarsten. Vanuit de vensters van Saint-Paul en omliggende kastelen zag men de maaiers als stippen voortbewegen op het veld. De zon flitste in sikkels en zeis. Half naakt, druipend van zweet, schoren de mannen plek na plek van halmen schoon.
In 1949, Dutch author Hella Haase published her novel In a Dark Wood Wandering, set in the courts where the Limbourg brothers were all the rage in their day. Many translations of the novel were decorated with one of the Limbourg pictures.
Meestal kun je, hoe fraai andere miniaturen ook zijn, uit die periode en van daarvoor, toch altijd zeggen, ja, in een bepaald opzicht lijken ze allemaal op elkaar. En dat is met deze afbeeldingen van deze miniaturen van de gebroeders van Limburg absoluut niet het geval. Die zijn gewoon uniek wat betreft hun visie op de werkelijkheid.
Up until the 1950s, the brothers were called Les Frères de Limbourg, due to the fact that they made their most famous work in Paris near the old Louvre castle. But their craftsmanship did not originate in France. The three brothers started their painting careers in the Duchy of Gelre. They were born around 1385 in the city of Nijmegen. Only recently, and more or less accidentally, their Dutch surname and the whole Nijmegen artistic family were discovered in the city archives. The Van Limburg family and the Maalvaal family on their mother's side.
Door de gegevens die wij gevonden hebben in de schepenprotocollen en ook nog in wat andere bronnen, hebben we als een soort legpuzzel allerlei dingen aan elkaar kunnen breien, zeg maar, waardoor we toch een bepaald beeld hebben gekregen van een familie, een schildersfamilie in Nijmegen.
En Johannes.
Arnoldus van Limburg, beeldensnijder. Vendizione staat er dan. Verkopen. Ja. Aanleg Tildes. En moeder, ja. Dat is dus de eerste aanwijzing. En waar naar voren komt wie hun ouders zijn. Ja. Hier op dit stukje van de Burgstraat, op het hoekje van het Stockholmstraatje, daar denken we dat Metta Maalvaal en haar kinderen ook bij haar vader in huis woonden. En dat dus de gebroeders van Limburg hier in dit stukje van Nijmegen zijn grootgebracht. En dat hier ook de ateliers van de Van Limburgs en van de Maanwaals waren.
Hier, waar je tegenwoordig nog altijd een aantal juweliers en edelsmeden vindt, hier moet rond 1400 het centrum geweest zijn van de edelsmeedkunst. Hier vond je de fijne ambachten. Edelsmeden niet alleen, schilders, beeldensnijders. En precies op deze plek, hier moet vrijstaand het pand hebben gestaan waar de gebroeders van Limburg werden geboren, waar in ieder geval hun jeugd doorbrachten. En binnen zo'n werkplaats werden die kunstenaars getraind binnen allerhande verschillende ambachten. Niet alleen de schilderkunst, maar ook edelsmeedkunst, beeldsnijkunst, borduurwerk. En het is zo mooi om te zien dat je precies binnen die familie van Limburg-Maalwaal die verschillende ambachten ook tegenkomt. Vader was beeldsnijder, maakte houten beelden die vervolgens ook gepolychromeerd moesten worden, gedecoreerd, geschilderd moesten worden. En moeder, zo weten we, werkte als borduurster. Opa was actief als heraldisch schilder en edelsmid. En binnen die omgeving hebben die gebroeders van Limburg zich kunnen ontplooien. Niet alleen het mengen van pigmenten, het fijnmalen van pigmenten, maar vervolgens ook het werken met bladgoud. En dat is een essentieel element geweest binnen hun vorming. Dat ze hier hebben geleerd om met bladgoud te werken, dat bladgoud dat ze later konden toepassen in hun miniaturen.
These are brilliant painters who can think this and who can do this. And again, part of that is having the experience of going beyond just one artistic medium and thinking into and through other media and how do you combine them. What they produce is better than the sum of the parts. The Limbourgs could draw on real intimate knowledge of different media like sculpture and like goldsmith's work. And because of that, when they need to use sculptural form to invest their figures with a plastic energy and strength and a kind of kinetic activity, they do that drawing on their knowledge of sculpture. And when they need to control the use of gold for luminous effects and varying effects and playing off of colors, they can do that with nuances that other ordinary illuminators did not do. They were head and shoulders above any ordinary painters of the time.
In order to appreciate the Limbourg brothers' work, we have to go to New York. On the northernmost tip of Manhattan, we find a building from another world and another era, the Cloisters, a fantasy copy of a medieval French monastery. The Cloisters houses the medieval art collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. One of the finest pieces at the Cloisters was made by the Limbourg brothers. The book is called Les Belles Heures. La Belles Heures is currently being photographed and renovated in the restoration studio of the Metropolitan Museum. The sheets of vellum that were folded and bound for centuries are now separate pages. For the first time, scientists are able to analyze the manuscript with the latest techniques.
It had been decided they would do a facsimile of the manuscript. Probably in the past, if it was disbound, they probably didn't examine the pages with a microscope, I'm sure. So it's a very unique, wonderful opportunity. I think that there were 3 different hands working throughout parts of this manuscript. We had digital infrared photographs taken of all of the manuscript pages, and the first one that struck me as being a particular kind of hand is this one where the artist is struggling to draw this central figure. He has rearranged the line several times. The hammer, the feet, the skirt lines. In the second image, it seemed much softer, very few descriptive lines other than the outlines of the characters can be seen. And I thought that was a very sculptural type of drawing hand. And in the third hand, it struck me that this person tended to extend the lines of the figure, that the figures were elongated, that there was a movement in almost a circular motion in the groups. So it's a very elegant, but different yet from the other two hands.
In 1402, fate smiled upon the Limbourg brothers. The Duke of Burgundy invited them to work for him in Paris and in his capital, Dijon. This Philip the Bold did not only own the eastern part of France, but also the wealthy region of Flanders. For the Duke of Burgundy, the Limbourg brothers produced the Bible Moralisée, a sort of illustrated Bible. They painted no less than 384 miniatures in it. They were barely 20 years old.
If you are simply the painter in the village or the town, or even the city, you are, in a sense, your status may be just like the man who makes barrels and the man who makes wheels, or the person who forges metalwork, right? But if you are a court artist, then you are involved in the life of the court, and you're involved in the arts that are around the court, which means you are living with sculptors, mint masters, painters of other kind, poets, theologians, confessors, priests. Well, when you inhabit that world, that is a change. That's a significant social change. In that sense, they are close to the beginning of a significant change in the social and intellectual status of painters. That is, for the time, certainly modern.
The brothers weren't able to enjoy their new status in Burgundy for very long. After 2 years, their patron, Philip the Bold, died. But his brother, the Duke of Berry, recognized their talent. He took the three painters from Nijmegen under his wing.
The Duc de Berry, Jean-Duc de Berry, was the kind of man that if he didn't exist, he'd have to be invented. He was the first of the Middle Ages mad collector that ever existed.
Around the year 1400, the Duke was one of the most powerful men in France. He was the king's brother and owned a large part of the country. He derived his name from his land, the fertile region of Berry around his capital, Bourges. Together with his royal household, he travelled back and forth between his 17 castles. The Limbourg brothers usually travelled with him.
He commissioned from the Limbourg brothers a manuscript called the Belzer, which is in New York, and that was completed. And it's one of the most innovative book of hours, not the largest, but one of the most innovative in terms of its beautiful and wonderful and interesting cycles, images of the saints, St. Catherine, St. Bruno, that are unheard of in books of hours. Just picture series after picture series, which have no real place in a book of hours, but are like a private picture gallery that you can hold in your hand.
To me, its fascination is that it is a visual laboratory of their work and development. And you see them trying to devise new and inventive ways to create a pictorial narrative that is unparalleled in art previously.
A Book of Hours, simply put, was an illustrated prayer book, which was the bestseller of this period. Everybody who was anybody had to have a Book of Hours. So that if you were wealthy enough to commission a Book of Hours, you would also commission the illuminations to go in them. And you can imagine that sometimes these might be the only pictures that the owner of that manuscript might ever possess. You only need one Book of Hours in your life, really. But the Duc de Berry had about 15. So he takes this form and uses that as a means for his artists to paint more and more and more pictures, ever increasing in size, ever increasing in interesting subjects. He obviously didn't need them to pray from, but they were beautiful to look at.
Ik moet zeggen, madame, het boek is schitterend, ging Berry voort, terwijl hij naar de koningin ging en voor haar staan bleef. Mooi werk, prachtig werk. Maar ik zal u bij gelegenheid een paar bladen van mijn nieuwe getijdenboek laten zien. Maître Paul van Limburg en zijn broers verlucht er de kalender in. Ik zeg niet te veel als ik het een wonder noem. Men zou zweren dat de bloemen in het gras te plukken waren en dat de kraaien elk ogenblik konden opvliegen uit de sneeuw.
The three gifted brothers became the Duke of Berry's favorite court painters. They obtained a high position at the court, valet de chambre, the Duke's chamberlains.
But enter the household of Jean-Duc de Berry. I mean, really enter the household. Not just someone who was paid from time to time to do a work of art. They had permanent salary. It's like a professor getting tenure. It was a lifelong appointment. They had a job, full-time job. And we know that they really inhabited this world. Jean-Duc de Berry gave them a house of noble proportions, it says, in Bourges.
Paul van Limbourg's house was located on the Rue Port-Jean in the center of Bourges. He was the most talented of the three brothers and was given leadership of the studio. Around 1410, the Limbourg brothers embarked on a very ambitious project, Les Très Riches Heures. In addition to his earlier books, the Duke of Berry wanted to have the ultimate book of hours made. He gave the three brothers all the money and means required to produce it.
It's, for instance, in the Très Riches Heures for the very first time that we have full-page calendar miniatures, which is kind of not a fluke exactly, it's a freak. They didn't exist. Before that time, calendar miniatures were very small, size of a postage stamp. And he said, no, I want big scenes, and I want lots of landscape, and I want castles. I want my castles in these miniatures. And he got it.
Il change d'idée à chaque étape. Il change, par exemple, l'encadrement d'une image. Ce n'est pas un encadrement rectilinéaire. Il y a toujours les petits échappés, les créations de surfaces qui sont tout à fait nouveaux. Il n'y a pas de règles dans le manuscrit. Les chefs-d'œuvre ont toujours une audience assez précise. Et dans ce cas, c'était le duc de Berry. Il a dû être très aimé par les frères Limbourg, et je crois que l'amour était réciproque.
In order to finance his expensive pastimes, the Duke of Berry drove his subjects to the extreme. Because of his unreasonably high taxes and his abuse of power, the Duke was loathed by the public. During the last years of his life, a revolt broke out, and some of his favorite castles were set on fire. On the 15th of June, 1416, the Duke died at the age of 76 in his castle in Paris. The Duke of Berry now lies in the crypt of the Saint-Étienne Cathedral in Bourges. He is kneeling by his own tombstone. A small bear rests at his feet. The bear from his personal coat of arms. But what happened to the Limbourg brothers? After the Duke died, nothing more was heard of the brothers in Bourges. In order to find the Limbourg brothers, we have to go back to Nijmegen. There, in the archives of their town of birth, their names are mentioned one last time.
Arnoldus van Limburg, dat is de broer. En Margaretha, zijn zus. En die zijn dat de alle omnia, bona, mobila en immobila, dus alle roerende en onroerende goederen. Kwam dan Herman, Pauli, Ak, Johan de Limbourg. En die broer en die zus, die erven al hun goederen in het Nijmeegse schependom en ook wat ze in Frankrijk bezitten. Dus hieruit blijkt dat de gebroeders Limburg overleden zijn. En dit stamt uit 1416.
At the height of their fame, fate struck. In the same year as the Duke of Berry, the three brothers died in Paris. They were barely 30 years old.
Somehow, I mean, having studied many artists, some died very young, some died in old age, they all seem to have kind of an innate sense of their own mortal timing. The Limbourgs, more than most, seem to be racing headlong to achieving a visual perfection. They seem to innately know that their time was extremely limited.
The original Les Très Riches Heures cannot be viewed, and even the Belles Heures is very difficult to access. Nowadays, however, traditionally made facsimile editions are available. They are highly exclusive and especially made in Switzerland. It took the modern facsimile makers 2 years longer than the Limbourg brothers needed to make the original. For us ordinary mortals, it's the only way to experience some of what the Duke of Berry felt when he turned the pages. Meanwhile, in New York, Margaret Lawson has made a surprising discovery.
On the last page, after going through many quires, looking with the microscope in the top corner, in the top of the castle in the distance, there's this little tiny P. And I know they didn't sign it wasn't traditional anyway for people to sign their work in those days. But I think Paul was probably the main character, and it makes sense that he would be the one to do it. I think this was supposed to be the Duke's castle, and when you look at the page and you can't see it, what a wonderful secret to have sort of placed your initial, possibly Paul, found it as a way of leaving his mark without anyone knowing in the final page of the manuscript. I haven't found any others, so it would be wonderful to find a J and an H.
Ik denk dat de gebroeders van Limburg alles bereikt hebben wat ze tijdens hun leven maar misschien hadden willen bereiken. Namelijk dat het prachtige werk op een schitterende manier gemaakt bewaard is gebleven. En dat het eeuwen en eeuwen na hun dood nog bekeken wordt en bewondering en verwondering wekt. En dat de mensen daarmee bezig zijn. Ik bedoel, dat is toch het hoogste wat ze hadden kunnen hopen en verwachten. En dat is gebeurd.